Borguyor, Part 2. A week later, Emir hurried from the back kitchen, balancing a tray piled with fresh burek and baklava. Melis bustled behind him, assisting customers with a practiced smile that barely concealed her fatigue. Everything seemed to be running smoothly at Sweet Delights, until the bell above the door chimed. Emir's eyes shot up, and he nearly dropped the tray. There, standing in the doorway with an uncertain look on his face, was Ahmet Yilmaz, Emir's father, a figure from a past he had tried to forget. A hush seemed to descend over the café, though in truth only Emir's world went quiet. His heart thudded as old anger and hurt flooded back. The man's hair was peppered with gray, and his tailored suit was a bit too perfect for the laid-back café. He took a hesitant step forward. Emir's shock was so deep that for a moment he felt as if time had stopped. The sight of his father standing in the doorway was a jolt to his senses, a disruption to the carefully constructed reality he had built for himself. "Emir," Ahmet said quietly, voice shaking, "it's been a long time." Seeing Emir's ashen expression, Melis discreetly set down her clipboard and approached. "Emir?" she asked softly. "Do you need a moment?" He swallowed hard, forcing himself to maintain composure. The last time he'd seen his father, Emir had been a teenager watching the man walk out the door with a suitcase. No phone calls, no explanations, just absence. "I'm fine," he managed, though he could feel his blood pounding in his ears. Before either man could say another word, the door chimed again. Leyla entered, looking radiant in a pale blue dress. She smiled at the familiar scene, until her gaze landed on Ahmet. Instantly, her expression faltered, and her confidence wavered. Ahmet's eyes flicked to Leyla. Shock, guilt, and something akin to fear passed across his face. Emir didn't miss the silent exchange. A dozen questions flashed in his mind. Do they know each other? But how? For a tense heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Leyla mustered a polite nod in Ahmet's direction, as though greeting a mere acquaintance. "Good afternoon," she said quietly, stepping further into the café. Emir's eyes darted between the two of them. A chill rushed through him. Why would she look at my father like that? The shock of Ahmet's arrival clashed with suspicion about Leyla's reaction. Ahmet cleared his throat. "I'd like to speak with you, son, in private." Emir's back tensed. He could almost feel the concerned gaze of his customers. The last thing he wanted was a dramatic confrontation in front of everyone. Casting an apologetic glance at Melis, he jerked his head toward the back hallway. "Let's go somewhere quieter." Ahmet followed him toward the storeroom door, but as they passed, Leyla took a step to intercept them. Her hand trembled at her side, as if she'd considered reaching out but thought better of it. The quick look she gave Ahmet was loaded with meaning. She began, but words seemed to fail her. She shot Emir a look of near panic, then turned away, crossing to a table by the window instead. Melis watched the entire exchange, a knot forming in her stomach. "There's more going on here than I realized," she thought. Her eyes flicked between Emir's rigid posture and Leyla's sudden pallor. Emir and Ahmet stood in the cramped storeroom, surrounded by sacks of flour and sugar. The overhead light radiated abrupt shadows on their faces, adding to the detectable tension. For a moment, the silence was so thick it was almost suffocating. At last, Emir broke the silence. "What do you want?" His voice was brittle. Ahmet lowered his eyes, regret brimming in his gaze. "I came to see you. He paused, swallowing his pride. "To apologize, perhaps. To try to make things right." Emir's jaw clenched. "And you show up after all these years out of nowhere?" Ahmet exhaled. "I know it seems sudden, but I've been reassessing my life. There are mistakes I can't undo, but I want to make amends for the future." Emir crossed his arms over his chest as though shielding himself. "We'll see if that's possible," he muttered. Anger warred with a flicker of curiosity. He wanted answers to questions that had haunted him for years. Why? Why leave? Why now? Sensing his son's turmoil, Amit took a small step forward. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The sincerity in his father's tone made Emir's resentment flare anew. "What about my mother? She spent years struggling, raising me alone. And you just left." Amit's eyes shone with regret. "I have no defense, Emir. I can only say I'm sorry." Emir's chest heaved. Before he could gather the swirl of words building in his throat, he heard the soft chime of the cafe's door, signaling someone exiting. Part of him knew, without looking, that it was Leyla. He could almost sense her anxiety from behind the storeroom wall. A fist of tension clenched in his gut. "Leyla, my father." They recognized each other. He forced himself to look back at Amit. "You have no idea how complicated your timing is," he said through gritted teeth. Amit blinked, confusion flickering in his expression. "What do you mean?" The question hung unanswered. Emir raked a hand through his hair. "I need to get back to my customers," he said abruptly, feeling far too many emotions at once. "We'll talk more later, when the cafe is closed." Amit inclined his head. "I'll wait, or come find me. Here's my number." He extended a business card, but Emir didn't move to take it. After a tense silence, Amit set the card on a nearby stack of boxes, then slipped out of the storeroom. When Emir finally returned to the main dining area, he found Sweet Delights in a swirl of murmured excitement. Clearly, the regulars had picked up on the drama. Some cast curious glances, others pretended not to stare. Melis stepped up cautiously, resting a hand on his arm. "Emir," she muttered, "are you all right?" He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just gave a tight nod. His eyes searched for Leyla, but her usual corner seat was empty. A pang of disappointment mingled with suspicion. She'd left without saying goodbye. The last thing he'd seen was that haunted look on her face when she saw Amit. Questions churned in his mind. Did she know? Has she been hiding something all along? The notion felt like a betrayal, which stung more than he wanted to admit. "Emir?" Melis asked again, her tone gentle. He turned to her, exhaustion etched in his features. "Close up for me tonight, please. I need some air." Melis nodded, her eyes brimming with concern. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him she was there if he needed to talk. But the words lodged in her throat, and all she managed was a sympathetic squeeze of his hand. Without another word, Emir slipped outside. The bustle of Istanbul's streets enveloped him, but it did nothing to quiet the storm raging within. His father's return, Leyla's reaction, the suspicious tension in their eyes when they met. Everything pointed to a secret that could unravel his life again. The sky outside Sweet Delights was streaked with the oranges and purples of a descending sun. Usually, the cafe's cozy interior would be empty at this hour, tables wiped clean and lights switched off. But tonight, a single lantern glowed in the corner, illuminating two figures seated at a back table. One was Emir Yilmaz, head bowed, fingers interlaced before him. Across from him sat Leyla, her eyes brimming with an unspoken confession. Emir could still hear the echo of the cafe's door closing behind his father, Amit, just hours before. The tension of that encounter weighed on him like a storm cloud. Leyla had arrived moments later, a mixture of panic and resolve etched into her features. She had asked him to stay behind, said there was something he needed to know. Now silence filled the space where cheerful chatter and the scent of pastries usually reigned. Emir, uncertain what to expect, forced himself to focus on the subtle details. How Leyla's long, delicate fingers kept twisting together. How her usually poised demeanor seemed to tremble at the edges. "Emir," she began, drawing in a shaky breath, "I haven't been entirely honest with you, and I need to explain before this goes any further." He caught the quiver in her voice, a note of fear woven through every syllable. "What is it?" he asked gently, though a pit had begun to form in his stomach. The unease he'd felt when Amit and Leyla first locked eyes in the cafe returned in full force. "You can tell me anything." Her eyes glimpsed at the door as if worried someone might barge in. "You saw how I reacted when your father came in," she said. "That wasn't the first time I've met him. I've known him for quite a while now." Emir tensed. He already suspected there was more to their connection than polite acquaintanceship, but hearing her say it so plainly tore at him. "How?" he pressed, keeping his voice even. "What's been going on between you and Amit?" Leyla exhaled, her knuckles going white where her hands laced together. "I met Amit through a mutual friend a few years ago," she admitted. "At first it was just casual meetings, shared dinners or events. Then it became more." Her voice dropped. "I became his mistress." For a split second, Emir couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. The cafe's familiar warmth vanished, replaced by a piercing chill. His father's mistress? All the warmth and fascination he'd felt toward Leyla collided with rage and betrayal. This was the man who had abandoned his mother. And now he'd entangled Emir in yet another heartbreak, this time through Leyla. "Say something," Leyla pleaded, tears threatening to spill. "I know how awful it sounds. I never planned any of this. I never expected to meet you, to feel what I feel for you." Emir swallowed hard, a bitter taste rising in his throat. "All this time you knew my father was the same man who walked out on me and my mother, and you said nothing? You let me pour my heart out to you about him." Her tears began to fall in earnest. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that if you knew, you'd hate me, or that you'd never believe my feelings were real. But they are, Emir. I promise they are." Across the cafe, hidden just beyond the doorway to the back kitchen, Melis froze in place, tray of utensils clutched to her chest. She had been finishing up the day's cleaning when she'd overheard Leyla's trembling voice. Though she knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, each syllable rooted her to the spot. Her heart pounded for Emir. She'd never seen him so vulnerable. And yet a secret part of her flared with a confusing mix of relief and guilt. Maybe in this tangled mess, Emir would realize he deserved better. Back at the table, Emir rose, shoving his chair back with an abrupt scrape. I don't know how to process this," he muttered, pacing toward the darkened display case. He stared at the reflection of himself in the glass. "My father, the man who vanished on us, is also the man you've been." His voice caught in his throat. "How long?" "Over a year," Leyla whispered. "But it's not what it seems. I ended it. At least I tried to, before coming here." Amit wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept insisting we could be together openly someday, but I was done. Then I met you. It felt like I was finally seeing what love could be without lies. I never meant to deceive you, Emir." He let out a hollow laugh. "No lies," he echoed. "How about everything you omitted when I asked about your life, your family, the reasons you came to Istanbul? That's not honesty, Leyla. It's betrayal." She stood, crossing over to him, desperation in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, reaching for his arm. "If I could change it, I would. But I can't. What I can do is tell you the truth now. Tell you that what I feel for you is real." Emir jerked his arm away, though his expression wavered between hurt and longing. He wanted to believe her, to recapture the spark that had drawn him in from the start. But the looming specter of his father weighed heavily on his mind. "I need to think," he said at last, his voice unsteady. "I can't just pretend this is some small misunderstanding, not after what my mother and I went through." At that, Leyla bowed her head, tears sliding freely down her cheeks. "I understand," she murmured. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait if that's what it takes." She turned to leave, her form silhouetted against the faint glow of streetlights outside. Emir didn't try to stop her. Instead, he stood alone, the cafe's once inviting hush now haunted by the echoes of her confession. In the days that followed, Emir was a ghost in his own cafe. He arrived early, donned his flower-streaked apron, and churned out pastries like a machine. The usual joy he took in kneading dough and piping frosting was gone, replaced by a numb efficiency. Customers noticed his distant expression, though they chalked it up to fatigue. Melis, who knew him best, watched with growing concern. One late afternoon, as the cafe's usual bustle died down, Melis approached him gently. "Emir," she began, voice low, "you've been quiet lately, more than usual. Do you want to talk about it?" Emir paused his dishwashing, water dripping from his fingertips. He glanced at her kind brown eyes and saw genuine worry there. "Melis, He trailed off, uncertain where to even begin. Talking about Leyla, about his father, felt like admitting he was sinking in quicksand. Still, a part of him needed relief from the burden. "You remember when my father came in last week?" She nodded, recalling the tension in the air. "Yes, you didn't say much afterward." With a shaky breath, Emir set a dish aside. "He's involved with Leyla intimately. She was, maybe still is, his mistress." Melis's eyes widened, and despite having overheard part of Leyla's confession, the reality hit harder, spoken aloud. "Oh, Emir," she whispered, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry." A swirl of resentment, heartbreak, and confusion tore through him. "I can't believe the man who left me and my mother is somehow still in my life. Worse, that he's found a way to hurt me again, without even trying." Melis squeezed his shoulder gently. "You don't have to face this alone. We can figure this out together." Before she could finish, the front door chimed. Emir turned to see Leyla standing in the entryway, wearing a long coat and holding a small envelope. Her gaze flicked nervously between Emir and Melis. "Emir," she said, voice just above a whisper, "could we talk for a moment?" Melis withdrew her hand, stepping aside. "I'll give you two some privacy," she offered quietly, heading into the kitchen. But she paused just behind the doorframe, heart pounding as she eavesdropped for a second time, torn between guilt and concern. Leyla approached Emir hesitantly. "I want to apologize again," she said, producing the envelope. "Amit wrote to me, insisting we meet. I thought you should see this." She handed over the letter. Emir's eyes scanned the words scrawled in his father's neat handwriting. Invitations to discuss what happened. Offers of financial stability. Please to remember their shared bond. A sense of disgust rose in Emir's throat. "He hasn't changed at all," Emir muttered bitterly. "He thinks money and smooth words fix everything." Leyla nodded, looking miserable. "I can't see him, not now. I wanted you to know that I'm done with him. For good." Emir wanted to reject her claim outright, but the earnestness in her eyes gave him pause. He knew that if anyone understood Amit's capacity for manipulation, it was him. "Why show me this?" he asked cautiously. "Because I don't want secrets," Leyla said. "Not anymore. I'm not interested in what Amit can offer. Only in making things right with you somehow. I know I can't erase the past, but I can try to be honest going forward." Emir's anger was still there, but so was a flicker of empathy. He remembered the quiet moments they'd shared before everything unraveled, the sincerity in her smile, the kindness in her words. "I'm not sure how to move on from this," he admitted. "I feel like there's this stain between us now." Leyla's lower lip quivered. "We can't undo it. But maybe if you give me a chance, we can rebuild something new, something separate from your father." He didn't respond right away. Each second stretched long and heavy, until finally he tucked the letter into his apron pocket. "I have to figure it out," he managed. "I need time. This is still painful." She nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I understand." As Leyla turned to leave, Melis emerged from the kitchen, her gaze following Leyla out. She could see that Emir was shaken, but maybe also a fraction lighter. Her stomach clenched at the thought. Was he truly considering giving Leyla a second chance? After Leyla was gone, Emir and Melis stood in silence. Finally, Emir cleared his throat. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said. Melis forced a supportive smile. "You've got nothing to apologize for. You need to do what's right for you." She tried to keep her voice steady, even as her chest tightened. In the quiet swirl of heartbreak, she realized something. If Emir's heart did open again, it would likely be for Leyla, not for her. Still, she pushed away her own feelings, determined to be there for him however he needed.